All right, so number one, why did some images seem confusing for Kenji? Why did it seem confusing for him? Raven, what do you have?
Because Kenji only had a limited exposure to images and size perception, so when he was exposed to distance and depth, it didn't make sense to him.
Yeah, good job. Good job. So he was limited to his perception just because where he grew up, right? He grew up around in a thick wooded area, right? Tall trees, so he had no idea the perception of certain things. And I think it detailed about the mountain, like he viewed the mountain as pretty small, and then when they pulled up to it, it's like, whoa, holy cow, it's a lot larger than I thought. And he had no idea with depth perception, okay, and movement even about how objects obviously are going to become a little bit larger when they get a little closer to you. So he had no idea with perception and his memories of perception. And we talked a little bit about it last chapter with referencing past memories. Where's that located in the brain? Where does that occur? Where does that happen? Kiara? Hippocampus. Yep, good job. Good work. Good work. Awesome. Okay. So again, it's just really the lack of perception. All right. He was isolated for so long, and it kind of details about socialization, right? And how he really just had no understanding, no past memories to reference these type of visual stimulation. Good. Good. 2, according to Turnbull, how did we learn size constancy and consistency here? What do we got here? Brittany, what do you have for 2? Yeah, right. So with experience, okay, and this details back to chapter 1 with nature versus nurture, right? Is it inherited traits, inherited perceptions, characteristics, personalities, or is it something that we learn over time through socialization, through learning, through experience? And in this case, obviously, it has to deal with what? Experience, right, Haley? Yeah, with nurture, okay, and just understanding through experience how we can perceive the outside world. Katie, what's up? Yeah, go ahead. All right, 3, do you think that Kenji could adjust to life in your city or town? Explain the difficulties he might encounter. Noah, what do you have for 3?
I said just to eventually just take a long time to do it.
Yeah, all right. So you're saying he could eventually adjust to our society, right? Maybe living here in Elizabethville. Obviously, take some time, but sooner or later he can maybe figure it out. Can you imagine him trying to walk across the street and seeing a car down the street, like down the road? He's like, "Oh, it's pretty small. Oh, look how small that car is!" And all of a sudden, it's picking up speed, coming closer to him, and he's like, "Whoa, look out!" A lot. Obviously, his perception is gonna make him back up or feel any type of emotion. Yeah. All right. What do you have for this one, Kiara? What's up? So if you walked into Pizza Delight, do you think he could maybe adjust to society then and what he was perceiving in Pizza Delight? Oh, okay. Yeah, not right away. At first, he'd be a little confused of what's going on, but after some time, he'll figure it out. Just like with children, right? Eventually, once they learn the ways of life through experience, then they can make connections to obviously how to survive, how to adapt in society. A little bit more difficult though if it's a grown man, a grown person, right? A grown woman, let's just say, for someone to maybe adjust. But still, through experience, maybe we'll see that adjustment. All right, good. Any questions on that sheet there? I thought that was an interesting story here with Kenji, socialization. All right, let's move to Virgil now, huh? What do we have for 1? How did Virgil become blind? Unfortunate here for Virgil. Haley, what do you have for number 1? Yeah, good. Yeah, so very unfortunate for him. Just with dealing with a lot of those issues and problems, and eventually with cataracts, obviously causing some issues for him to see, as his vision became blurred, or it was hard for him to perceive the outside world. 2, why didn't Virgil realize what he was seeing after his sight was regained? Allison, what do you have for 2?
He said he was never able to see 100%, so his poor eyesight was
Yeah, good job, right? So for so long, he had no idea with past memories of exactly what things look like anymore, and obviously objects and depth perception and figure, maybe ground background of things and movements. Was very hard and difficult for him to perceive this type of visual stimulation, and really just to live in his surroundings in his environment. So this was a huge shock, obviously. Good. 3, what psychological difficulties do you think Virgil encountered after regaining his sight? What do you think, Raven?
So it's having to go from being typically functional blind man with a wall and with a cane and function to having to learn how to use his vision from scratch and be entirely introduced to the visual balance and perception.
Good.
It
Yeah.
will probably take longer to recover than he hoped for. So we have to learn everything from up when he was supposed to be a child in order to perceive the world he's supposed to be able to.
Yeah. Wow. I couldn't even imagine, right? Everything from balance, like you said, right? And posture. And when you're walking, obviously, without a cane. And as you're visualizing things around you with movement or any type of ground background where it could cause some issues, especially when you're moving, when you're walking. Let's say driving a car. I don't think you just jump right in the car and just take off. It'd be very difficult. I'm sorry. I didn't even try that, to be honest. Holy cow. This always gets back to you.
I think you bringing it up just makes it worse.
I wasn't even thinking of that. I was just
I wasn't either.
He was blind. I don't think he could drive a car that he wanted.
Yeah. I don't think he could either.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if he gained his eyesight back, maybe eventually he could pick up on it.
You have to take the driver's test.
Yeah, he could do it. Why couldn't he? Why couldn't he get that? Well, he could do it. Yeah, why not? It might take him some time, but he could get to it. He could get to it. Oh, cow. I apologize. Like I said, I didn't even try to bring that up. All right. So number 4, Christian, what do you got here? What strategies would you use to teach concepts relating to sight to someone who is blind? For example, how do you explain a rainbow to a blind person?
Try explaining that simple object for the things that he had been told about and explain colors and forming hopes that he has a sense of relation to what is being told and are relating objects to what is already told.
Yeah, trying to make connections, right? Trying to somehow build connections for him to understand, to live his everyday life with basic objects and building off of that to maybe entertainment, right? Maybe forms of understanding, like a rainbow here. Say, how do you describe that to someone? Well, it's very difficult to do, especially with someone that can't perceive, visual stimulation there. Good job. All right, any questions on that, guys? We good? All right, Bellringer for today. Good work on that, everybody. I'll put the grade in as soon as possible. So we got a reference back to last chapter to answer this, Bellringer. Explain where auditory processing occurs in the brain. What area of the brain is associated with receptive language? Here we go. All right, let's get to it here. So explain where auditory processing occurs in the brain. Where does it occur? Caitlin, what do you have? Where does it occur? Where is that? Temporal lobe. Good job. And where's that located when we're associating here with our brain here? In the side of the brain, right? Okay, good job, good job. So on the side of our head, right behind the temple, obviously. Okay, that's where that is associated. So what is the area associated with receptive language? What we have. So I know I talked about this last chapter. Raven, what do you got for receptive language?
So I have the Northwest and the West area.
Okay, yep, good job. So the Broca's area, the Wernicke's area, obviously receptive language, the temporal lobe, and expressive language. Good job, good job. So as long as you mention those two locations there, that's important to know, especially when we're moving on here and understanding where this auditory processing occurs within the brain. All right, terms for today. I don't think I have too many actually. So we got place theory, frequency theory, and vestibular sense. Okay, all right. Does everybody have these down? Yeah, all right, let's get to it. So we finish up talking about visual stimulation. We talked about perception of vision, talked about obviously the anatomy of the eye and how that all works, okay, and how that all works. So again, reminder, when we're visualizing something, okay, the lens actually flips that image upside down to the back of our eye. And we all know that the photoreceptors are located in the retina, the inner layer of the eye. Right? The fovea is where these photoreceptors are mostly densely populated, where they're located. And it's up to our brain, our occipital lobe, to perceive that image right side up. So it's amazing how that happens literally instantaneously, right? Within milliseconds, how that occurs, even faster than that. It's really interesting to think about. All right, so hearing. All right, so as we're hearing, as we're sensing and perceiving auditory information, auditory stimulation, the only way we can do that is through literally air. Okay, the vibrations that are occurring, this is causing a movement, an air movement to our ear, where we're hearing and when we're processing this stimulation. So without air, can you hear anything? No, you can't, right? So even in space, obviously there's no air in space. As something like, let's say, is blown up or a shot is fired in space, you won't hear it because there's no way of that movement, that sound movement, to come and enter your ear canal to perceive that stimulation. Does that make sense? So Star Wars lied to us this whole time. As the Death Star blew up, no one actually could hear it. Darn it. Dang it, George Lucas. But anyway, with hearing, the only way we can hear is this with the movement, okay, obviously of us perceiving is stimulation. All right, so back to frequency and amplitude. So with hearing, very similar, obviously, to what we talked about with the electromagnetic spectrum. Okay, with frequency, with amplitude, with wavelength. All right, so with sound, frequency is the number of cycles completed by a wave in a given amount of time. So it determines pitch. So if there's a higher frequency, meaning there's more waves that occur at a given time, that means it's going to be a higher pitch. Right? So I know we talked about with vision, electromagnetic spectrum, with a higher frequency, that's associated more with what? Gamma rays, X-rays. Does that make sense? Okay. With sound, if it is a higher frequency, meaning more waves occurring at a given time, that means it's going to be a louder sound. All right, so with amplitude, like I mentioned, that is the point, a higher pitch for frequency. Higher frequency meaning higher pitch. Okay, lower frequency meaning less waves occurring at a given time. That means it's going to be a lower pitch sound. Right. So you remember at the beginning of the chapter, we're playing some of those sounds that you could barely hear. Right. It was almost like a mosquito sound, right? A very buzzing sound. So eventually you won't be able to pick up on those frequencies. You won't be able to pick up on that sound because it's just too high of a frequency. And same thing with lower wavelength. That means it's going to be a lower pitch sound. So there's less waves occurring at a given point, means a lower pitch. All right, so with amplitude really is dictating the sound level, right? So if it's a higher amplitude, if it's higher from the point of equilibrium, that means it's going to be a louder sound, right? If amplitude is a little bit lower, that means it's going to be a lower sound. It's going to be a faint sound. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, higher frequency, more waves occurring, that means it's a higher pitch sound. So pitch. With lower wavelength, okay, a lower frequency, okay, less waves occurring at a given point means low pitch. Higher amplitude, so point of equilibrium. As that wave's rising even more from equilibrium, that's going to be a louder sound. Lower amplitude, lower sound. There we go. So again, physical strength of the wave, volume of the sound with amplitude. Frequency, the pitch. All right, so the process of hearing. The process of hearing. So there's many parts of the ear I'd like you to know, but it's pretty simple. It's pretty understandable exactly how this works and how we process auditory stimulation. And there's multiple theories of actually how we perceive auditory information. So first, the sound wave obviously goes through the ear canal. So as it's carrying through the ear canal, all right, it is going to then trigger the eardrum. The eardrum is just a muscular, it's really just a muscular fiber pretty much that vibrates depending on obviously the frequency and the amplitude of whatever auditory stimulation is occurring. So let's just say it's a higher pitch sound. That means it's a higher frequency. Okay, that's going to ring our eardrum in a different way. And connected to our eardrum is the bones of the middle ear. Right up here at the top, you can see it. So the bones of the middle ear. And you can just understand it by anvil, hammer, and stirrup. Okay, there's other names for it, but hammer, anvil, stirrup, spine. That's kind of what I want you to associate it with anyway. So the three bones of middle ear is connected to the eardrum. And as the sound waves ringing through the auditory canal, it's going to impact, it's going to interact with the eardrum. Connected to the eardrum is the three bones of the middle ear, hammer, anvil, and stirrup. And those three bones of the inner ear are connected to the cochlea. So now we're getting more towards the inner part of the ear. So there's an outer ear, there's a middle ear. Middle ear is mostly associated with the three bones of middle ear, and then moving into the inner ear. So these three bones, hammer, anvil, stirrup, are connected to the cochlea, right? Cochlea kind of looks like this snail, right? Looks like a snail. So it's connected to the cochlea, which vibrates depending on the pitch, depending on the amplitude, obviously, of that sound. And within the cochlea is almost like a saltwater-like liquid fluid. And as that fluid is interacting with the basilar membrane, which is just hair fibers within the cochlea, that is going to then send a neural impulse to the auditory nerve, right? So the auditory nerve is going to send that neural stimulation, that neural impulse to the temporal lobe to understand exactly what we're hearing. So this will then be perceived in the temporal lobe. And again, there's really not much to it. There's not much to it. And there's theories of obviously how we process this information, whether it's frequency theory or place theory, but for the most part, that is the anatomy of the ear. That is how we're processing auditory information. Does that make sense, guys? So again, this slide really walks it through for you. So the sound waves enter the ear canal, vibrates the eardrum, connected to the three bones of the middle ear, which is connected to the cochlea. So as the cochlea is vibrating, depending on obviously amplitude, frequency, that is going to move the liquid within your cochlea, okay? And that is going to interact with the basilar membrane, which is a hair-like fibers that is sending that neural impulse to the auditory nerve. We all know the auditory nerve is connected to the temporal lobe, much like we talked about with the I can't think of it now. Optic nerve, yep, within the eye, and how that's connected to the occipital lobe. So very similar, very similar. All right, and this is kind of what it looks like. Obviously, breaking it down a little bit more. The outer ear really is just the ear canal. Okay, obviously the look of the ear. And the sound waves travels eardrum, connected to the three bones in the middle ear, vibrates the cochlea, which obviously contains that fluid within your ear that interacts with the basilar membrane, and that is sending that information, neural impulses, to the auditory nerve to be processed within the temporal lobe. Make sense? All right, so the semicircular canals, that is, again, is connected to the cochlea, and we'll talk about the vestibular sense here soon, and that helps with balance, okay? Yes, the cerebellum helps with balance and posture, but also this vestibular sense is included. All right, so place theory. So the theory that links the pitch we hear from the place in the cochlear membrane. So depending on the basilar membrane within the cochlea, okay, obviously this might dictate or allow us to perceive a different sound. So wherever that fluid is interacting, whatever point in the cochlea, that is going to help us perceive whether it's a high-pitched sound or a louder or softer sound, okay, depending on frequency and amplitude. And that's depending on where that fluid is interacting with the basilar membrane in the cochlea. So the place theory, just think about it, whatever place in the cochlea that is being perceived, right? Wherever that sound is interacting with the basilar membrane in the cochlea. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, it's detailing about place, about location within the cochlea. Frequency theory just kind of excludes the cochlea. Depending on the frequency, the amplitude, that is just going to send a vibration to the auditory nerve where we're going to understand where where we're perceiving this information. So it just kind of excludes the workings of the cochlea, really, and the basilar membrane. A lot more people associate with the place theory. They believe that is more of an accurate way of perception and understanding auditory processing, just because the basilar membrane obviously sends these neural impulses to the auditory nerve. Without that, how do we understand and perceive information? It's like with the frequency theory, whatever vibrations are occurring, whatever sound waves are carrying through your auditory canal, that just carries through the eardrum, bones of the middle ear, through the cochlea to the auditory nerve, and just kind of excludes the location of the cochlea. It excludes really the interaction of the hair-like fibers of the basilar membrane and reacting with this salt water-like fluid within your middle ear. All right, is there any questions on place theory, frequency theory? You good? All right. So I was going to do this demonstration, but it's really hard to do in a room. Obviously, the sound waves are just going to be bouncing off the walls, and it's really difficult to do in a closed area. But it's just signifying, it's showing exactly how we can depict and perceive where a sound's coming from, depending on a location of a sound. Okay. And here's this: if a tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? Well, does it make a sound? What do you think? Oh, well, I lost my PowerPoint. Darn it. Well, does it make a sound? What do you think? If a tree falls in the forest and no one's around to hear it, does it make a sound? Brittany, why? You don't know? You're not there to hear it. Again, sound is perception. The only way it is true is if we actually are there to perceive the sound. Right. So again, it's one of those things. Obviously, it falls. Obviously, it does make a sound. But if no one's there to perceive it, how can it occur? All right. Well, that's what I got for today. I was going to talk about vestibular sense and how that is obviously associated with balance. So with vestibular sense, it's if this fluid in the middle ear is maybe ruptured, if it is maybe if it's impacted, this could it could impact our balance. Right? And you see that a lot with many impact sports. So like football or boxing, if someone loses their vestibular sense, they won't be able to gain their balance because that fluid is all out of whack. In a way, it keeps us upright. It keeps a great, strong posture. All right, that's all I have for today.